Hello friends! Thank you for taking the time out of your week to join me for the first video of 2022. This week's topic comes from one of our fellow viewers, Benedicte, and I'm sorry in advance if I mispronounced that at all. We're going to discuss the abduction and subsequent murder of Canadian teenager Sharron Prior. Sharron went missing merely blocks from her home in 1975, and her body would tragically be found days later. Sharron's case is considered a cold case and has been for nearly 50 years. Her family still hopes for new information that may hopefully close such a painful chapter in their lives. As always, I want to spread awareness, so any information, even if it's minor, needs to be shared, and I will have the contact information in the description and at the end of the video. So please join me as we remember the life of Sharron Prior. Sharron Kim Prior was born on February 9, 1959 in Montreal, Canada, to parents Yvonne and George Prior. Her mother Yvonne was born in England, but her parents immigrated to Montreal, specifically the neighborhood of Point St. Charles, when she was only a child. It was here she met George. George at the time was a private in the Canadian Armed Forces when the two fell in love. They quickly married and were over the moon with the arrival of their first child, a daughter they named Sharron. But the Priors would not stay a party of three for long. The day before Sharron's second birthday, Yvonne gave birth to her twin sisters, Doreen and Morin. She thought the twins were her birthday present, and Sharron was so excited to be a big sister. In 1962, George received transfer orders to Manitoba, moving the family away from Point St. Charles, or the Point as the locals called it. The Point was Yvonne's home and one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city, but for the betterment of her family, the Priors made the change. Shortly after relocating, the youngest child, George Jr., was born and everything was complete. But in 1965, the relationship between Yvonne and George was not working out, so they parted ways, with Yvonne heading back to the Point as a single mother of 4 children. Yvonne chose the area because it was not only affordable for her, but also she knew her children would be raised in a tight-knit community with a low crime rate. From a young age, Sharron was described as a gentle, caring, and responsible girl. She loved animals and often took in strays, tending and nursing them back to health. Her twin sisters said she had aspirations of becoming a veterinarian. Sharron was a shy girl, but she had a warm, welcoming face, and she soon found her group. Sharron joined the Boys and Girls Club, where she started playing on the floor hockey league and participating in arts and crafts classes. Sharron's mother said she was a cautious child, but she stayed out of trouble and was all around well behaved. By 1975, Sharron was now 16 years old and just a typical teenager. She loved music, such as Elton John, and was dating a young man named John, who had been her crush since the 4th grade. She had a close group of friends and was very appreciative of her mother. On March 29, 1975, the day started off like any other. Sharron woke up, had her breakfast, made her bed, washed up, and got ready for the day. It was the day before Easter, so Yvonne had to go out for some last-minute extras for the big dinner the following day. She picked up some goodies for the children, and Sharron decided to help make the holiday even more special for her younger siblings, George Jr., who was 11 at the time, and Stephen, who was a 4-year-old boy that the Prior family was fostering. Sharron spent some of her afternoon painting Easter eggs, and upon completion, she had her own errands to run, which Stephen accompanied her on. As previously mentioned, Sharron was a member of the local Boys and Girls Club, so she was headed over to pick up her Leo's Boys jacket. The Leo's Boys Sports Association was founded by Joe Mell, whose brother Leo died at the age of 17 to leukemia. Leo's Boys was an opportunity for children to play in a variety of sports, from basketball to hockey, without it costing the families anything. When it started in 1952, the association consisted of 2 teams made of 30 kids, and at its peak, 100 teams consisting of 1,000 kids. Every child got a green Leo's jacket that was earned through selling raffle tickets, and Sharron had finally sold enough to have her very own. But unfortunately, when she got to the club, they didn't have her size. So instead they gave her a receipt to return at a later date. Sharron and Stephen then returned home for dinner. The Priors were joined by Yvonne's friend Doug, and that evening Yvonne remembered she made stew. She claimed none of the children cared much for it, but they ate some anyways. After dinner, Sharron helped wash up and place the Easter eggs out of reach from the children before asking her mother if she could join some of her girlfriends at Marina's Pizzeria. Marina's was a local teen hangout spot that was only about 5 blocks from the Prior home. Yvonne had no problem with this, and Sharron went to her room to get ready. Sometime between 6 to 7 p.m., one of Sharron's friends from the neighborhood stopped by to spend time with her while she got ready. The girls had been friends for a long time, but didn't share similar friend circles since they attended different schools. Sharron had a difficult time deciding what to wear, so she borrowed one of her mother's sweaters and paired it with her favorite suede jacket. She then said goodbye to her mother and left the home around 7 p.m. Her friend left with her, but she was heading to her home. She asked Sharron if she wanted her to walk with her to the pizzeria, but Sharron said no, thanks anyways, then crossed the street and went on her way. Sharron's friends waited for her, but she never showed up. Her friends assumed she had gone with John and the other boys they all hung out with to a hockey game. But after the game ended, the boys came to the restaurant and Sharron was not with them. In fact, none of them had seen her all night. Back at the Prior home was no different. Sharron's curfew had come and gone, and Sharron had not made it back, or even called her mother to let her know she would be late. Yvonne was very concerned because this was out of character for Sharron. So Yvonne decided to wait up to see if Sharron would come home. 1:30 a.m. came, and Yvonne watched from the living room window, while the twins watched from their bedroom window. But there was no sign of Sharron. The following morning, Yvonne started to call Sharron's friends and John, but no one had seen Sharron. During one of these calls with Sharron's friend Mary, Yvonne did learn of some troubling information. Mary stated, quote, "I don't mean to worry you, Mrs. Prior, but a woman was attacked on Ash Avenue sometime after 7 p.m." End quote. The victim of the attack was a 23-year-old woman named Cheryl Roy. Reportedly, the man was wielding a knife when he grabbed her, and thankfully, before he could hurt her, he was scared off by another passerby. Cheryl described him as having blue eyes, a mustache squared at the corners of his mouth, and speaking in a low, calm voice. He was wearing blue jeans, a dark blue ski jacket, and black shoes with pointed toes. This news panicked Yvonne because the direction the perpetrator fled could have landed Sharron right in his path. Cheryl was brought in to try and identify her attacker, but she couldn't be completely certain, so no one was charged with the assault. A search was launched with hundreds of residents who took to the streets looking for the 16-year-old girl, but nothing came from it. Yvonne also went on TV to plead with the community for the safe return of her daughter, but again, nothing came from it. Days passed with no news, and many began to believe Sharron may have run away, but her family couldn't fathom that idea. Sharron had no reason. She loved her family, her friends, and her boyfriend, and she also left no indications of trying to abandon her life. She left her bus pass and her money at the Prior house before leaving for the pizzeria. The days dragged for not only Sharron's family, but the residents of the Point as well. This type of thing just didn't happen in their small community. Then on April 1st, the unimaginable happened. Yvonne was up around 6 a.m. in the morning when she saw a familiar-looking man knocking on the door of her friend who lived across the street. The man had a newspaper under his arm, and she realized it was a fellow acquaintance named Ronnie. So Yvonne called out to him asking why he was up so early, to which he replied nothing and kept knocking on the door. Yvonne sensed something was off, so she goes outside to talk to Ronnie. He met her halfway and Yvonne said nothing and grabbed the paper from him before turning and rushing back to her home. Ronnie called after her, exclaiming, quote, "No, Yvonne, don't look at it," end quote. But it was too late. She opened the paper and she knew the picture was her daughter. She stated, quote, "I knew it was her. I knew her shoes," end quote. The photo in the newspaper showed a body in the snow. It had been found in Longueuil, a city about 25 minutes from the point. Yvonne discovered that Sharron was gone. She stated, quote, "That's how I saw it. No one came to speak to me," end quote. She phoned the police right after in order to get confirmation, but she was far too distraught to go and identify the body. So instead, she asked her brother to go in her place. And it was in fact Sharron. Everyone in the point saw the story in the newspaper, and much like Yvonne, her friends knew it was Sharron. Sharron was discovered early that Tuesday by a beekeeper named Jacques Beltran. Jacques had received word that the gate to his apiary was opened, and this wasn't common. He claimed he locked the padlock every night before leaving and thought the night before had been no different. But to his surprise, the lock was hanging open and didn't appear to be tampered with. He went onto the access road to investigate when he stumbled upon a body that was nude from the waist down, lying in the snow about 75 feet from the road. Jacques quickly phoned police, and from here the investigation began. Sharron's murder was blunt and ugly. She had been assaulted and beaten badly. Sharron was found wearing only her suede jacket, blue sweater, and her socks and shoes. Her jeans were found a few feet from her, and her underwear hung on a nearby tree branch. Police also found partly chewed tape tangled in her hair, and branches tightly clutched in her hand, indicating she was alive when her murderer left her in the snow. Her legs were bent in a way as if it appeared she was trying to pull herself up but was too weak to accomplish her goal. At the scene, several pieces of evidence were discovered. Firstly, about 15 feet from the body, police found tire tracks. They also discovered a blood trail that led from where the car was parked to where the body lay. No drag marks were present, and Sharron had no mud present on her shoes or her socks, indicating she was likely carried out of the car. This led police to believe that more than one person was present, since the task seemed to be performed so effortlessly. Not far from the body was a man's shirt size 17 collar with 34-inch sleeves that was believed to have been used as a binding for her wrist. Police purported by the size of the shirt, the suspect was about 6 feet tall. Also found next to the gate post was a perfect imprint of a right shoe, sized 8.5. Due to the depth of the imprint, police felt it was likely made by a heavier person. Also discovered was a ring with the word love inscribed on it, a page from an English magazine of a young girl and a gun, a car seat cushion, and the receipt for a jacket with the name Sharron Prior. The autopsy revealed Sharron's time of death was around 20 hours before her body was found, meaning Sharron was held captive for days. The coroner also discovered her chest had been crushed, possibly from her killer kneeling on it, which led to her hemorrhaging internally. Her head had injuries consistent with a pointed object such as a ring. She had several bruises on her face, fractures on both sides of her jaw. Her nose was broken, and she had a hole in one of her cheeks, possibly caused by a tooth that was loosened during the attack. On April 4th, 1975, 200 mourners packed into the chapel at St. Matthew's Presbyterian Church to lay Sharron to rest. They were all wounded, but police were confident with the evidence gathered they could bring the killer to justice. But 13 months passed, and no one had been charged in the murder of Sharron. The detective on the case at the time said they'd interviewed 38 people in relation to the case. 6 of these suspects were detained, and each appeared to be a fitting suspect at the time, but eventually had to be released due to a lack of evidence. Some of the names mentioned as suspects included Frank Daly, also known as Jerry Moore, who managed the pizzeria, and a handful of people in relation to him. the beekeeper Jacques Beltran and his co-owner Roger Augrey, and also a man named Raymond Ament who owned the adjacent property to the beekeeper. Sharron's close friends and boyfriend were also interviewed, but nothing came of any of this. Sadly, time and life continued to move on. Leads dried up and information quit coming in, and her case was considered cold. Regardless, this didn't stop her family from discovering what happened to Sharron that night. Yvonne doesn't know for sure, but she believes Sharron didn't make it far from the house, especially since a neighbor who knew the family well was driving down the street around the same time Sharron left. The neighbor would have passed her had she gone the direction of Marina's, but she never saw Sharron. Yvonne also stated her daughter was not physically tough, and if she was faced with an attacker on the street, she would probably frozen up with fear. Since her murder, Yvonne has changed the way she views even her once close neighbors, because she doesn't know who could have been capable. She states she could have easily passed the murderer on the street and not even known it. Greg McCrary, who worked as a profiler for the FBI, developed his own theories for the Prior case. He believed the attacker was younger, somewhere in his 20s, and maybe living in the area with his parents. He also determined this wouldn't have been his first time. He also felt the random assailant who tried to hurt Cheryl could very possibly be the same man who killed Sharron. He stated when killers get into their, quote, hunting mindset, end quote, they're more likely to risk more, such as a second abduction. The likelihood of two men intent on abducting women operating at the exact same time in the same small, low crime area was statistically improbable. The attacker had to also know the area well, especially the disposal site, since these areas are considered high risk. He would have needed to know his exit points and would choose a place familiar to him for comfort's sake. McCrary determined the attacker displayed signs of a sadist, since he held his victim for days. A sadist will typically follow a pattern, which McCrary believed could be helpful in narrowing down suspects. He stated, quote, typically, sadists will find compliant victims among people they know. They will appear to be nice and charming at first, and to vulnerable young women, it would work. They then slowly become more demanding as he molds her in order to better control her, before moving on to degrading and then roughing her up. Eventually, they run out of compliant victims and turn to escorts, where they develop a relationship for being weird or violent. And then, when that avenue runs out, they start hunting strangers. End quote. He explained police should start by looking at the men who have minor domestic arrest or solicitation. McCrary also stated Sharron's killer would not have been a smooth talker or high-functioning member of society. The assailant on the street used a knife to try and abduct Cheryl, which led McCrary to indicate he did not possess strong interpersonal skills. The man knew he couldn't con her with sophisticated ruse, and when words fail, they use their fist. It was evident by the wounds found on her face that Sharron's killer lacked the skills to maintain control, so he chose violence. McCrary also believed that since this felt like a stranger-based abduction, the killer would have been considered a serial guy, and these murderers rarely stop on their own. Based on this theory, it was purported that Sharron's killer could be responsible for the death of Tammy Leakey, a 12-year-old girl who was found 6 years after Sharron. McCrary felt maybe Sharron was too hard for him to control, so he sought a younger victim for his next try. The similarities between Tammy and Sharron are almost too much to overlook. On March 20th, 1981, Tammy had been visiting her grandma in the Point when she disappeared just blocks from where Sharron went missing. She was sent to the store to pick up some milk, but never returned home. Tammy's mother found only her glasses on the sidewalk and immediately phoned police. Later that evening, a man discovered her body, which resembled the same type of assault as Sharron. Her case, too, remains unsolved. There are also a large number of unsolved cases dating back to Sharron's murder, which could support the theory of a possible serial killer operating in the area at the same time. McCrary believed police probably talked to the guy, and only two things could have happened after that. He states, quote, "His confidence grows because he left without handcuffs, or he gets spooked and he moves away," end quote. In 2000, Yvonne wrote to the police requesting them to review the evidence in Sharron's case since technology had made advancements. However, a week later, she received a response in the mail stating they couldn't carry out her request because they didn't have the evidence. The police department had discarded majority of the evidence in 1995. Yvonne was hurt and distraught, but she pressed them to look for her clothing, which thankfully they kept. The clothing was analyzed, and police finally had a DNA sample that did not match Sharron's. In July of 2004, police received a tip about a garage space where Sharron may have been kept. The garage was located behind an apartment, and the goal was to hopefully recover some of Sharron's DNA. 3 samples were found, but sadly none of them matched hers or even the murderer's profile. The most recent update was in April of 2012 when an anonymous donor upped the reward to $10,000 and opened a dedicated phone line for tips. This led many to believe something had come up, but it was merely speculation. Police keep current tips and details quiet since Sharron's case is still currently open. Another interesting angle that was worked was the girl who saved Cheryl Roy. The local woman agreed to undergo hypnosis to hopefully pull out greater details from that day. Days after her session, police sent her several photos where one man stood out to her. The man was convicted Canadian serial killer William Patrick Fife, who was found guilty of killing 5 women in Montreal. However, he claimed to have killed as many as 9. According to Fife, his first killing didn't happen until 1979. Obviously, this isn't definitive proof that he wasn't involved with Sharron, but at this time, no evidence connects him to Sharron Prior. It is also unknown if police have compared DNA or really investigated this lead. Amateur investigators have also attempted to link Sharron's murder with others over the years, and supposed confessions that have been made. One of these confessions came out in a book called The Hard Road, written by Peter Edwards. The book is about Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club in Montreal, and it briefly mentions Sharron's murder. The passage reads, quote, "One of the more frightening Montreal Satan's Choice members was Mike French, born in 1950. French, nicknamed Crazy Mike, was a product of the Queen's School in Lower End Westmount and the Weredale House Boys' Home in West Montreal. The Boys' Home closed in 1977. French was very active in the Bikers' War against the Popeyes. He was found murdered in November of 1982. He was said to have boasted about killing Sharron Prior in Port St. Charles 7 years before his death. His suspected killer was a hitman in the West End gang, but his murder was never solved. The killing was considered by many to be a sort of community service." End quote. Throughout the years, there have been many suspects, but nothing has been definitive. Everything has just been speculation. Yvonne and her family continue to fight for not only justice for Sharron, but also other families who've experienced loss like they have. In 2019, Yvonne was in the news where she and 9 other families of murdered and missing girls were denouncing the public security administrator. The security administrator refused to meet with the families in regards to changing legislature and how their cases were being handled. Yvonne stated she didn't want the horrible incompetence she experienced to be experienced by other families in the future. Yvonne wants justice for not only her child, but other mothers in her shoes. In remembrance of Sharron, the Boys and Girls Club she once called home established an annual scholarship in her name. Sharron's family has also set up a website to keep the case and her memory alive. The Prior family has and will not give up on finding her killer. Yvonne states, quote, "We want to know the truth. We have to know the truth." End quote. If you or anyone you know has information about the murder of Sharron Prior, please call the number up on the screen or send an email through the secured mailbox at www.sharronprior.com. So I think this was a good way to start 2022. Cold cases always feel so bittersweet. I'm glad to provide a platform for those who seem to be forgotten, but I'm also sad because I know we may not get a resolution. Unfortunately, with cold cases, time is against us. Witnesses are getting older, and in this case, police just got rid of almost all of the evidence. I couldn't believe that, and I can't imagine the betrayal Yvonne must have felt. I always try to include everything I can about these cases because anything, even the smallest detail, could trigger something. You just never know. But as always, share your thoughts and comments down below and we can chat about it. If you found this to be informative, please consider giving it a thumbs up to let YouTube know you want more. And lastly, if you're not subscribed yet, you should because we would love to have you under the ash tree. Thank you to Benedicte, and again, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, for sharing this case with us, and thank you to all of you, my lovely viewers, for your support and appreciation. You really do make my week. Here's to a beautiful year. Please, 2022, be good to all of us. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, friends.